Hey there, my name is Cat Coquillette and I am the artist behind the brand Cat Coque. In addition to selling my designs on Spoonflower, I also license my art to big brands like Target, Urban Outfitters, Home Goods, Anthropologie, and more. I'm also a top teacher on Skillshare. I have over 20 classes that teach you everything from illustration skills, painting, drawing, and classes that help you grow your creative business. And while I'm doing all of this, I'm also traveling the world full-time. I've actually been living out of a suitcase for the last 7 years. I get inspired by the things that I encounter during my travels, and then I incorporate that into my artwork. So speaking of artwork, today you are going to learn how to draw one of the cutest and on-trend motifs that is absolutely blowing up right now: flowers and mushrooms. This is a short and sweet tutorial. It's inspired by one of my most popular classes, Blooms and Shrooms, Draw Fun and Funky Art in Procreate. In that class, you learn how to create a beautiful mushroom and floral illustration right here on your iPad using Procreate. So this tutorial today is like a mini version of that class. So after you finish your mini mushroom and flower today, I encourage you to check out my full Blooms and Shrooms class. You can purchase it on my website, or you can watch it on Skillshare with a membership. And if you're not already a Skillshare member, no worries. I have a special link that will hook you up with a free month-long trial of Skillshare, so you can watch my Blooms and Shrooms class, plus all of my others with that link. Alright, without further ado, let's dive right in. The supplies you'll need for this tutorial are pretty simple. You'll need an iPad and the drawing app Procreate. Plus, a stylus comes in handy, but if you don't have one, you can just use your finger. Alright, so I have Procreate open. This is what my gallery looks like. Let's go ahead and click this plus sign to start a new canvas. I'll click this other little plus sign up here in the top right corner to set up a custom canvas. First, I'll change it to inches. And this is just a little for fun drawing, so I'm just going to keep this at 10 inches by 10 inches, 300 dpi, and that gives me 70 layers. I'll go ahead and click Create, and here is my brand new canvas. So let's go ahead and start with the sketch. I'll tap the brush to go into my brush library, and under this sketching folder, we have a brush called Peppermint. This is my favorite sketching brush in Procreate. It's a default brush, so everyone should have it in their iPad. And next, I'm going to click this circle up here on the top right to open up my palettes. You have some options down here at the bottom. I want to either be in disc or classic, and I'm just going to go ahead and choose a bright red color to sketch. The sketch won't appear in the final illustration. This is just to help me see what's up on my screen. And by the way, 2 fingers will always undo an action. 3 fingers will put it right back into place. You can do the same thing over here with these arrows. Undo, redo. But let's go ahead and undo that little paint stroke. All right, so I have my peppermint brush selected. My color is bright red. If I go over here to my layers, I'm on a brand new blank layer, so I am ready to go. All right, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that I can see my entire artboard. And I'm going to start by drawing a flower. So for this one, I want it to be a sunflower. So I'll go ahead and start by drawing the big circle for the center. And with my pen still touching the screen right here, I haven't lifted it, it's gone ahead and created this ellipse, which is pretty cool. If you put 3 fingers on your screen, it snaps into a perfect circle, which is pretty awesome. So I'll go ahead and have a circle right there in my screen. I want to move it to the center, so I'll click my arrow tool and just move it off to the side a bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right, arrow to set the transformation, and now I'll do the petals of the sunflower. I'm just going to keep it nice and loose and gestural. Remember, this doesn't have to be perfect. This is just kind of giving us that basic sunflower shape. And you can always rotate your canvas around to make it a little bit easier to draw. So now the flower part of the illustration is finished. Let's go ahead and do the mushroom. So when I'm doing a composition like this that has multiple elements, what I like to do is have each element be on its own layer. And that way I can move things around independently until I find a great composition. So for this, I'll go ahead and click to open up my layers panel and toggle off the visibility of my sunflower layer. It's not gone, it's just hidden. So this check mark will hide the visibility. We can turn it back on later. And now I'll click this plus sign to add a brand new layer. And this is the layer that I'll be drawing my mushrooms on. All right, so maybe we'll have a mushroom shape that kind of goes like this. Maybe you're seeing it from slightly below. And there's the stem. Cool. It's always nice to have things in pairs. So maybe there's a second mushroom kind of off to the side like this that connects on the stems. Nice. As you can see, it does not have to be a perfect sketch. It can be really nice and loose and gestural like this. Cool. So now if I go back over here to my layers, I can turn back on the visibility of that sunflower. And now I have my mushrooms and my sunflower on two separate layers. So the first thing I'll do is go ahead, select my sunflower layer, go over here to my arrow, and I'm actually going to bring this down a little bit and make it a little bit smaller in this composition. You can zoom out a little bit if that helps to see your entire canvas. Awesome. Hit that arrow to set the transformation. I'll go back to my layers, select my mushroom layer, hit that arrow, and I'll do the same thing for this. So I just want to find a nice placement for these mushrooms in the composition. I think it looks kind of nice over here on the bottom right corner. Maybe they're tilted a little bit. So you can grab this green toggle and adjust the rotation. I think that looks pretty nice. Go ahead and press that arrow. Cool. So now we have the sunflower is that dominant hero of the composition. And then we have these nice cute little mushrooms that are overlapping it in the front. I think this is going to look like a really nice, intriguing composition. Again, I'm keeping it really, really simple. You don't need to overdo it in your thumbnail sketch. This is just to give you a general idea for placement when you start your drawing. So speaking of, let's go ahead and start filling this in with color. You can click that circle on the top right, and down here you have a lot of different options for how you define your colors. The disc, classic, and then over here on the far right are palettes. So these are all of the palettes that I've put together over the years for different types of illustrations. I really like minimal color palettes. I think they look really sophisticated. So for this illustration, let's keep it nice and simple. Retro-inspired color palettes have been all the rage lately, and I think a vintage feeling palette will look really good with these motifs in particular, sunflower and mushrooms. Very 60s. So from color, I like to start from large to small in an illustration. I get the largest elements in my illustration first, and then I move down to the smallest. This helps me build a cohesive color story. So for this, I'll go ahead and start with the sunflower. It's the largest element in my composition. Sunflowers already come with a pretty iconic yellow, so I'll go ahead and stick with that. I can either choose a yellow from somewhere in my palettes, like this, or I can go over here to classic and define it so that it looks to be the exact color I'd like. I think something with a little bit more orange in it could be really nice. You'll notice up here on the top right that your circled color changes as you adjust your palette. So I'll find a nice ochre yellow, looks fantastic, and let's go ahead and fill it in. And this is going to be the petals of the sunflower. Next, I'll go to my layers, and I'm going to hit this plus sign to start a new layer. And that way, we're not drawing on top of the sketch, we're drawing on an entirely new layer so that when we finish, we can go ahead and delete the sketch underneath it. It won't show through. But for now, I'll keep it on as a reference. And last but not least, let's go ahead and select a brush. So over here in my brush library, I'm going to go down here to the inking folder and select Syrup. This is one of my favorite Procreate default brushes when it comes to filling in swatches of color. All right, so I have Syrup selected. Over here in my layers panel, I'm on a brand new layer. There is nothing on this layer yet. And I have a nice orangey yellow selected. So let's go ahead and fill this in. Woo, that brush is way too big. 2 fingers to undo. I'm going to go over here to the left and bring that brush size down. That might be a little too small. Find a nice balance here. I think around 14% will be good. Also, something to point out while we're over here, this upper toggle defines the size of your brush, and this lower toggle defines the opacity. For something like this, I'm going to work with 100% opacity. If it was down at 50, you can see it's a little bit transparent. I don't want that for this stage. 2 fingers, 2 fingers. I'm going to bring that all the way back up to 100. All right, now let's start filling it in. Remember, you can rotate your canvas as you go to make it a little bit more intuitive for you to draw. Sometimes it can help to go over here to your layers palette and turn down the opacity of these layers. I'll go ahead and toggle off the visibility of my mushroom layer so that it's less distracting. And if you want to, you can even turn down the opacity of the sunflower itself. You can do that by clicking N and bringing that opacity down to somewhere around 50%. All right, now, again with that layer selected, I'll go ahead and finish out these petals. As you can see, it doesn't have to match your sketch entirely. It can be a little bit off. Okay, so now that I have all of these petals filled in, I can go over here to my color, drag it over, and drop it right into my sunflower. If your entire canvas just filled in yellow, that means one of 2 things happened. Here, I'll undo and show you. That could happen if your shape wasn't all the way connected. So if I have a circle like this, but it's not connected all the way, and I try to fill it in, that color is going to ooze out of that hole. Undo. But if you connect it all the way and then fill it in, it'll stay contained to that shape. So let me undo. You want to make sure that there's no gaps in your sunflower. Everything is connected entirely. And for this, that is definitely the case. And the other thing you want to check is your color threshold. So when you grab your color and you bring it over, before you lift up your Apple pencil, you want to take a look up here at that color drop threshold. So my Apple pencil is touching the screen right now. I haven't lifted it off. And this is where you can adjust how much of that color fills in. So if you go all the way up to 100, your entire screen is going to fill in with yellow. If you go all the way down to 0, you might get a weird halo around that fill depending on what brush you use. So best rule of thumb is to keep an eye on that color threshold, get it as close as you can to 100 without filling in your entire artboard. So for me, that's 99.6%. And now I can lift my pen off the screen. All right, so we have our entire petal area filled in. Let's go ahead and do the center. So I'll go over here to my layers palette, click this plus sign to add a new layer. And if you actually want to see what you're doing, you can go ahead and grab that sketch layer and bring it all the way up to the top of the palette so that it overlaps everything else and you can actually see it on your screen. All right, so now we have that new layer. Go ahead and tap it, make sure it's selected, and let's find a nice brown. So I'll go up here to my color palette and play around with these settings a little bit until I find a brown that I think is looking really nice. Cool, so just to go ahead and double check, on my layers, I'm on a new blank layer, not the yellow layer, but a new blank one. And now I can draw a circle, keep my pen touching the screen so that it connects all the way, and then 3 fingers to snap it into that perfect circle. I can go ahead and drag in my color and fill it in. Sometimes it helps to smooth out your edge a little bit at that point where it connected. Excellent. So now that I have the sunflower filled in, I can go ahead, go back up here to my layers, and turn off the visibility of that original sunflower sketch. I no longer need it. Instead, it's time to focus on those mushrooms. So I'll go down here, toggle back on the visibility of those mushrooms. Right now, they're hidden under the petals and the center, so I can go ahead click that layer, and drag it up to the top of the stack, and now I can actually see it. Oh, my canvas was rotated. Perfect. So now let's do the same thing with these mushrooms that we just did for the sunflower and fill them in with some color. I'll go ahead and hit my plus sign to make a new layer, go over here to my color palette, and I want this to be those iconic red mushrooms. I'll skew it a little bit more orange so that it feels like a nice vintage palette, but I think this is going to look really nice. So I'll find a color I'm happy with, go back to my layers, double check I'm on a new blank layer, and I'll start filling these in. I'll start with the circle right here, fill that in, and I'll do the same for this guy right here. Perfect. I'm going to do that same thing where I go to my layers, go to my mushroom sketch, click that N, and bring that opacity down just a little bit so that I can better see what I'm doing when I fill in the color. Now I'll start a new layer, so I'll hit that plus sign. And I'm going to do the tops of the mushrooms next. So for these, I'm going to have it be slightly lighter than their center inner areas because these should be the darkest part since they're in shadow. So I'll go back here to my colors and just make this ever so slightly lighter. Excellent. Layers, make sure I'm on a new blank layer, and I'll fill this in. And get this guy down here. You can always zoom in and kind of finesse and smooth out some of your line work as you go. I do this all the time. Awesome. So one thing to note here, in our layer stack, we need to go ahead and bring these tops of the mushrooms down so they're underneath this layer. Now we can actually see the inside. All right, last but not least are going to be those stems coming down. So I'll go ahead and start a new layer, go over to my color palette, and I want this to be a nice cream. So maybe I'll make it a little more yellow. That's feeling pretty good. We're on that new blank layer, and I can draw the stems. Same thing. We need to play around with our stack a little bit. I'm going to bring this above those other fills so I can actually see what I'm doing. And this is where I'll draw very, very carefully. So it looks like that stem is kind of going under the center of that mushroom, but then that top flap overlaps it. Cool. I'll fill that one in and do the same for this guy up here. This part went over a little bit. No worries. I can go ahead and click my eraser and just remove that part of the stem. Now I can fill it in, and voila! Let's go over to our layers and turn off the visibility of that sketch. And now we have our majestic illustration of these little mushrooms right here overlapping the sunflower. So one thing I'm noticing is right here, there's kind of an odd space where that flower petal kind of sticks out from underneath the mushroom. And down here, same thing. So this is one of the reasons why I love having everything on its own layer. What I can do is simply right swipe on all three of those mushroom layers, hit my transform tool, and move these over and really fine tune and adjust that placement so it feels a little bit more balanced. Hit the arrow to set the transformation, and now this is looking really, really nice. Another reason why I like having everything on its own individual layer is because that makes it really easy to adjust the color. Let's say, for example, I'll select the petal layer right here. We want this to be a different color. All you have to do is make sure that petal layer is selected. Go over here to your magic wand, and under Hue, Saturation, and Brightness, you can toggle around and play with different hues to explore even more colors. You can try really saturated, really desaturated, even play with how bright or how dark that color gets. So that's just one of the benefits of working with all of these different layers. I'm going to go ahead and undo that though, since I liked that original orangey yellow. And speaking of color, now's a great time to define what that background color looks like. So to do that, I'll go over here to my layers, tap where it says background color, and I could go either from my palettes and choose some sort of color, or I can go over here to classic and move around this toggle and find something that works really well. Like I mentioned earlier, I like the idea of having some sort of vintage vibe to this color palette. So I think I want to do a nice cream background so it almost looks like aged paper. So this looks pretty good. Yeah, it's very subtle. It has a nice cream color background, but it's not stark white. It feels nice 60s and vintage. And as a little bonus, I'll show you how you can infuse some fun texture into your illustration as well. So to do that, I'll go ahead and start right here with my petal layer. I'll tap it once and turn on Alpha Lock. So what Alpha Lock does is it means that whatever I draw on my canvas will only show up on this layer itself. Here, I'll show you what I mean. So I'll choose a completely different color, like a bright blue, bring my brush all the way up. And on this layer, because Alpha Lock is turned on, if I draw on my canvas, it's only going to show up on that layer itself. That is the power of Alpha Lock. I'll go ahead and undo. And so I use this for infusing texture into my layers. I'll show you how. So I'm going to start by finding a nice texture brush. You can get some nice ones down here in charcoals. Burnt Tree is a really fun one to play around with. Again, this is another Procreate default brush. So instead of just putting blue right on top of my flower, undo, undo, I want to go ahead and choose a yellow so it feels really nice and subtle. And here's a quick shortcut for you. You can go over here to your color picker, tap that, and drag this color picker around your canvas to change the color up here. So this is a nice little shortcut that I do. Say I want to change it to red. Bam, it's gone ahead and changed. But in this case, I want to start with yellow. So I'll hit my color picker, go over here, land on yellow, and you can see that it's changed up here in the top right corner. And this will be my starting point. So I'll go back up here to my palettes, under classic. Maybe I'll make it just slightly darker. And now, with that Burnt Tree brush selected, that layer selected, and Alpha Lock turned on, I can add some really nice subtle textures right into my illustration. Remember, you can change the size and the opacity of your brush over here. I don't want to overdo it, just a little bit goes a long way. I'll go ahead and do that for the other layers as well. So I'll open up my layers palette. Next, I'll do the center of the sunflower. Tap that layer, turn on Alpha Lock, hit my color picker, grab that brown. Maybe this one I'll make slightly lighter. And then same thing. I'll just gently brush in some texture like this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do that for my other layers as well. Awesome. So just by infusing textures like that, this illustration feels a lot less flat and a lot more dynamic. I think it's looking really nice. And now, if you want to add any sort of details or embellishments, this is a great time. So for example, maybe I want to add some spots on top of my mushrooms. I can go ahead, go over to my layers, select the top layer of my mushrooms, and then hit that plus sign to add a layer just on top of it, and then go to my brushes, go back to inking, and select that original syrup brush. And for the dots, I think I want to have it be the exact same shade as the background color. So remember, I can go to this color picker and drag it to sample the color right out of the background, and it changes up here. And now I can go through, resize that brush, and draw all sorts of detail embellishments that I'd like to add to my illustration. And I did this on a separate layer so that if later I decide I don't want those dots, all I have to do is toggle off the visibility and they're gone. So you can put them right back in or take them out. That's the beauty of working on different layers. So feel free to go through and add some more fun embellishments to your illustration. And when you're finished, the most important part is to add your signature. So I'll do that by clicking this plus sign, adding a new layer. I'm going to go back to my color picker, select this dark brown, go back to my brushes, under sketching, make sure peppermint is selected, and find a nice place to tuck in my signature. Perfect. And this is the beauty of working digitally. If you ever want to resize that, if you think it's a little bit too big, you can go over here to your arrow tool, bring it down ever so slightly, readjust the placement, hit that arrow to set the transformation, and wind up with a perfect signature. All right, so now we have our final illustration. I think it came together beautifully. Thanks for tuning in, and congrats on your final Bloom and Shroom illustration. Like I mentioned earlier, this tutorial is a little teaser for my class, Blooms and Shrooms, Draw Fun and Funky Art in Procreate. So if you want to learn more, I definitely encourage you to check it out. Just head to my website, catcoque.com/classes. I packed that class with lots of goodies and value bombs. When you take my Blooms and Shrooms class, you'll get access to all of the freebies and goodies. You'll get free Procreate brushes, and I'll show you how to use them. Plus, I'm also hooking you up with 8 custom color palettes that you can use on your Blooms and Shrooms illustration and any future artwork you create. You're going to learn how I use reference photos to quickly and easily sketch out a composition. Then you'll learn how to move pieces around until you strike that perfect balance. I'll also show you how to explore color studies so you can get a quick read on what colors are working best. Then it's time to dive right into the drawing. You'll learn how to fill in colors and infuse fun and quirky textures right into your shapes. This is one of my favorite parts of Procreate, and the free brushes that I provide include those great textures. And to finalize your illustration, I'll show you how to sprinkle in fun embellishments like stars and shapes, plus a sharp crescent moon to add some depth into your design. My class is geared at creating an illustration that is perfect for print on demand and art licensing. You'll learn how to work on larger canvases so that your final illustration can be replicated at huge dimensions. Plus, you'll get my best workaround for those layer restrictions that we all face in Procreate. You can purchase it on my website, or you can watch it on Skillshare with a membership. Remember, you can use my special link to get a free trial of Skillshare, which gives you access to Blooms and Shrooms, plus all of my other classes. Just head over to catcoque.com/classes to sign up. So I hope you had a fabulous time illustrating some mini mushrooms and funky flowers today. If you'd like to learn more from me, you can follow me on Instagram at Cat Coque. That's where I share advice for artists, cool projects I'm working on, collaborations with big brands, and more fun art tutorials just like this. Thanks for tuning in today, and take care.